Welcome to Board Gamers Anonymous, the podcast about board gamers and the insane fun we have at the table together. This is Chris.
Hey, and this is Anthony.
And this is episode 447, Higher Ranked Sequels of Older Games, according to BGG. We'd like to thank all our Patreon backers for helping us bring you a brand new episode. All right, friends, we are back, and we are talking about higher ranked sequels of classic favorite games on the BGG Top 100 list. These are the Nepo babies, so to speak, of the parents out there. You know, the games that you have and they're always on a corner, and then someone comes and replaces it because, like, it's better? Maybe? Possibly?
I love that analogy. That's awesome. It wasn't on our spreadsheet, but I was like, yep, that works. Yeah. People, they're like, oh, I like the old game, I'll get the new game. This is brilliant because I paid a lot of money for it. That's love it now.
Yeah, I when I was putting Anthony, I was putting this list together, I was like, you have your parent games, and then you have your sequel games, so to speak, that are the same but slightly different. But because of the original classic parent game, you just assume it's going to be better because it's shinier version of the older one. So,
yeah, that's how it works, right?
And actually, this also reminded me, in fact, because one of the big pieces of news, Anthony, I know that you were doing fancy academic stuff.
Oh, yeah, so fancy.
It was very fancy, and we'll talk about it in a minute. But what's more important than that, and the academic world of board gaming, is Mr. Beast, my friend. Mr. Beast.
How could we forget Mr. Beast?
I don't know. He's everywhere. He does everything.
Yeah, no, he said he was going to be here, but then he also said, who are you? So,
but he does listen. He's a big fan.
Oh, yeah, huge fan. Huge fan. I mean, he's a huge fan of board games. Can't argue with that.
No, he's legitimately a huge fan of board games. And in fact, he's a big Dune Imperium fan. So he plays it with his friends all the time. This is real news, real story. And he wanted to play some of the best players in the world. So he reached out to Dire Wolf and said, hey, what can we do to pull this together? Because that's what Mr. Beast does. If you've never seen his videos or anything else, again, I'm not going to go into all that, but you should have. He's everywhere. He does these kind of big events. So Dire Wolf, Mr. Beast, and I guess some other people in the board gaming community pulled together, I think it was like the last couple of winners of like the World Board Gaming such and such for Dune, put them in a room together with Mr. Beast, his people, and some other people, a Dice Tower person and such. And they had a big board game competition on Dune Imperium, but the new version, the Uprising. So they got to play the new version. So some differences in the game, and we could talk about that at another point once it kind of hits the stores. But they got to play the new version. They got to win a giant sandworm that came along with it. And Mr. Beast won. Shocker. He's Mr. Beast. He's like, the guy's got some skills. And he won like $10,000. I'm sure it was his own money that he won back, but other people won a lot of money. It looked like a tremendous amount of fun. You could find it on YouTube if you want to watch the video and see about a little bit about the competition. There's no interview with him directly, but it seems like a good time was had by all. And again, this is interesting because this is just a newer version of the classic Dune Imperium. And I don't even know if I should say classic, Anthony. How long is classic? When does it become classic?
I know it's been 3 years. It's classic's a bit of a stretch, but it's the longest 3 years in the history of humanity.
That's true.
Maybe it's a more like 40 years. So that would be a classic.
Yeah. And again, maybe it becomes a classic when the new version comes out, right? Like, is that possible? Like,
that is true. That does happen, right? We get like Agricola was a great game, and the Caverna came out, and you're like, oh, well, Agricola, the classic, the classic Agricola, which at that point was only like 5 years old.
Yeah, so. And again, it still, like, when you have the new version of the game, whether it's a reprint plus, a spiritual successor, or a new version of the older game, some of those games actually do better than the originals, and they have ranked up on BoardGameGeek And we're going to take a look at those Nepo Baby board games that have ranked up, crushed their parents, are on the top of the charts, and, where the original game is left behind on the rankings. And again, I guess we have to do this because of the hotness, right? Everyone needs a new version of the old game because hotness.
Yeah. Oh yeah. 100%. You could just say like, I made Underwater Cities 2.0.
Yes.
But I'm calling it something different because of IP, but whatever. Buy it. People would buy that.
Yeah. I was talking to someone at a game night, and I might have said the story before, not too long ago, and they had said to me that they love Dune, they own everything, but they're buying the new version. I was like, why would you buy the new version? And they said because it won't see table time unless it's the new version.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just like, well, that kind of breaks my heart.
Yep. That's so dumb.
I just like, but why? So, yeah. So, I don't know. Well, the new version, again, new spaces, new character cards, new resources, a whole bunch of new stuff to play along with. And that's pretty awesome. And I'm looking forward to it. I'm definitely picking that up. I don't own the original Dune. I've played it with so many people. I don't need to own it, but I like the game a lot. So, Dune Imperium Uprising, an unofficial endorsement / acquisition disorder, because there's new components for 1 to 2 players, which is awesome. And there's new rules, and you can play as teams, and there's new cards, and spice must flow, my friend. It must flow.
Yes. Flow, spice, flow. And you know what? The day we're recording this, or the weekend we're recording this, is when Dune Part 2 should be out. And it's not. But
Aww.
it's coming soon. Well, it's not for a bad reason. It's because of writer and actor strikes, which is a good thing. Like, we want those people to get paid.
They do.
But Dune's coming. More Dune is coming. That's what I'm trying to say.
It'll be interesting once this new version comes out and then the new movie comes out. How high will this version go?
You know, the funny thing is, this happened last time too. When the first Dune Imperium came out, it was supposed to come out the same month as the movie, and they delayed the movie by a year because of COVID.
Oh.
And then they did the same thing with the sequel, Dune Part 2. It was supposed to come out around the same time as the game, and they've now delayed the movie by 6 months, and the game is still coming out. So, obviously, it hasn't hurt Direwolf, because it's one of the top 20 games of all time now on BoardGameGeek, and Mr. Beast loves it, but just imagine the synergy that could have been.
Yeah, it's funny. But we're really looking forward to it, and we'll talk more about it when it comes out. All right, Anthony, so that's what's going on out in the world of board gaming. Do you want to mention briefly about what's going on in the academic world of board gaming? I don't know. You were gone. Question. You're back. You did a thing.
Are you going to do it? I don't know. I was at the Serious Play conference with Will. We were both up in Toronto for the 2023 conference. Both of us presented at this conference. It was amazing. I presented on how I've used board games in the writing classroom, and specifically how I use them to facilitate reflective writing, which is one of the big challenges in like a first-year writing classroom. It's getting the students comfortable with and practiced in reflective writing, which is kind of the goal of that sequence of courses. And Will presented on like how to develop an RPG system for use in kind of the therapy and the clinical setting. And it was fantastic. We both had a lot of fun. We met a bunch of amazing people at the conference. Didn't really know what to expect kind of going into it. It was a multi-track conference where they had like employee development and healthcare and game design and higher education and K-12 and tutorials. They also had some like grad students presenting their research. But the mix of all of that really worked well. Like, we met a bunch of amazing people. I met people who were making games. And I wish I had his name in front of me, but I met an amazing guy who was making a game that was designed to help people understand how misinformation works.
Oh.
So they had built this game, and they were working with like federal agencies to try to present this idea to teach people how people are misinformed and led in the wrong direction using like this game about Vikings. It was such a cool idea. So that was the kind of stuff you were seeing there. It's just really creative uses of games and systems. And yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was definitely not a board game conference by any means. It was like 80% digital, and then 120% academic, but for those people using games in the classroom and kind of discussing those things like I do and like we do here, Board Game Academics, um, it was a lot of fun. So it was our 18th year doing it. So I would say if any of that's interesting to you, check it out next year, because they'll be doing it again next year. I don't believe our presentations will be available online. I think you have to pay for access to those recordings, but we've done other recordings. You can see some of the recordings that we've done in the past from Long Island Tabletop and from the Game Based Learning Conference. Those are also online, and kind of have some of the same ideas mixed in there. So it was a good time.
Excellent. No, it's great. It's great to see that it's getting out there internationally, obviously, and that so many people take it seriously, no pun intended, and
Yeah,
that
right.
that there's a lot of great applications for tabletop games, video games, and stuff out there in the world. So, play is informative, educational, and
Yep.
communicative in a way that a lot of other stuff isn't. So,
It was really cool to be surrounded with like several hundred people who also believe that way.
excellent.
Because
Yeah.
you and I do this. Will joins us. Jen has joined us. But when I go into the colleges that I work at and I have these conversations, people are interested, but they don't necessarily understand or they haven't seen it work.
Mhm.
It's curiosity, not like let's discuss it. So being able to step into that and have a conversation about like, this is what I've done. What have you done? Oh, that's really creative. Well, this is how I would do that. Oh, that's really creative too. Like that is a very different conversation. The collaboration versus kind of the education. Um, so it's if you're at all interested in this space and how games can be used outside of just let's have fun, it was a fantastic experience.
Wonderful. So they might see that presentation somewhere else. Might do it somewhere else in the future. So
Yep, for sure.
excellent. Uh, I guess I'll mention briefly two things. One, we will be at PAX Unplugged. We should mention that because I don't know how or why, but the months keep going
I
and
know.
winter's coming. So myself, Anthony, Will, Jen, several other people from the crew will be there. So if you're there, let's talk because it's always fun to get games together at the table. Our friends from Better for Board Games will be there. As you know, we're running our board game charity event on November 4th in Fanwood, New Jersey. You could check out our page on boardgamersanonymous.com. Take a look at the events. Look for Charity 2023. All the details are there. Supporting getting more young girls, women into board gaming, inviting them to the table, providing a space that's welcoming, warm, and supportive. Thank you all for your support in advance. It's what we need to do. We want to expand the table and bring new people to board gaming, and this event should do a lot for that. So we'll have more details, especially with all of our different sponsors. If you're a board game company out there, a publisher, we would love to hear from you. If you have any support that you want to throw our way so that we can raise money for Troop 6000, which is a Girl Scout troop in New York City that's made up of girls from all these different shelter systems. Wonderful. If you happen to be in New Jersey or in the surrounding area, please join us. Come down, enjoy the games, or buy, sell, or trade your board games. A lot of opportunities for a lot of great stuff. And again, it'd be great to see you. All right, Anthony. So that's everything that's going on with us. We're going to be talking about Patreon. We have some Patreon episodes coming up, right?
Yeah. So I'm a little overdue. You should be seeing my next episode on my top 100 rundown. I think it's 70 through 61. Should be up here in the next couple of days after you listen to this. And then, Chris, you have your next episode of Kicking the Habit also coming up in the following week. Correct?
Woo! We're kicking it, man. There's a lot of stuff out there. And we'll be talking about typically about a dozen, Baker's dozen of the greatest games out there that you might want to take a look at to back. But Anthony, that's enough about us. What's going on with our listeners this week? What's our question of the week?
Question of the week this week is, what's your favorite board game production? Not necessarily best artwork or miniatures, although that might be the answer. But the best overall production of a game, from flavor text in the rulebook to table presence or even box design. So overall, everything production, because we've kind of reached that point in the hobby where there's attention that goes into everything. So over on the Patreon, we had several answers. We had Drew say New York Slice. This inexpensive game maximizes production. Upon smoothly opening it like a pizza, the table is engaged. Chunky chalkboard specials, guest check score pad, and pizza slices you're tempted to eat. This game is a cut above the rest. Very nice, Drew.
Nice.
Ryan says the new Castles of Burgundy Special Edition has absolutely fantastic production, bright colors, clear images, a great insert that overlay to hold the tiles for the insertable maps. It is amazing, and this is how you take an old game and make it fresh. Ryan also mentions Endless Winter, which I know you just recently talked about. Wonderful production as well. Besides the beautiful and attractive art, it has a truly functional insert that holds sleeved cards.
Very nice.
Yes. So over on the Facebook page, several people responded as well. We have 11 comments here if you want to check them all out. But some of the games people call out are Return to Dark Tower. Great art, great tower, excellent app integration, great minis. If you like the app stuff, great one. Mind Clash games in general got a couple of mentions. So Voidfall, Anachrony, Tricarion. I do agree, but I do have some issues also with almost all of their productions in some way. So just they always make like at least one weird decision. I don't know why, but generally very good, and especially for the price. Like they're not stupid expensive. Eric mentions Lewis and Clark, which is an old school game. It's a 10-year-old game now. In many ways, is one of the best produced games I've had a chance to lay hands on. The original had great quality cards, nice wooden pieces and stickers, gorgeous art, and I feel the publisher really attempted to weave in the history. And I agree, actually, for when that game came out, the production on it was really, really solid. Because games back then, they could skew either direction. Let's see, other ones we had PAX Pamir 2nd Edition just looks amazing. Everything is stylish for the culture and period. That's how the game should look and feel. I agree. This one is beautiful and amazing, and even more so if you play the original, which is the opposite of beautiful and amazing. So, big upgrade. Timothy mentioned Space Hulk, Talisman, Descent, Journeys in the Dark, Super Dungeon Explorer. That's an old school one. Roman mentioned Space Alert's rulebook, and any Vlada Shavato rulebook, I think, is generally considered a peak gaming moment, reading those rulebooks. And this one's for you, Chris. Vigard mentions Lisboa.
Ooh.
Whole package. The box cover, the board art, the thematic explanation, and the rules. Everything about this game is just so gorgeous. It is also a rare 10 out of 10 game for me, which helps too. So I could go with that. Honestly, Vitalis Erda's ability to work the rules in a way that is thematic and engaging and easy to learn. Even if it's 30 pages, it doesn't feel like 30 pages.
Sure.
That alone gets bonus points for me.
Yeah, I think his games alone, and like you mentioned, the rule book, not just the rule book, but of course the rule book, but the thematic gameplay. It just, as you're playing the game, you don't have to constantly go back and going, why this mechanic? It kind of flows. And I think if he couldn't do that as well as he did, all of his games would have been like pushed off to the side. It would be like a GMT collection of games.
Yeah.
Like, you don't belong in the mainstream, and they are. They're in the top 100. It's crazy. They shouldn't be there, but he does it so well. Like there's an equality to his games and to his rule books.
Yeah, it's incredible. Like what he's able to do. It's just fun too. Like where we're at with board games now. Like even games that aren't on Kickstarter. Like I recently was running through a game called Votes for Women, which I'll talk about in the podcast soon. But the production on this, and it seems like on the back, you're like, oh, it's like a GMT style, like cubes on a map, card-based game. But then you open the box and it has like reproductions of newspapers and clippings and photos and certificates and voting stuff. Like there's a bunch of historical documents packed into this box that kind of go with the experience of learning about suffrage and how women, fought for the right to vote. And it really, really adds the experience, even though those things have nothing to do with the gameplay. Like people look at them as they play. And I think we get increasingly games that will do that because people will pay for it. People enjoy that stuff.
And the biggest barrier for any board game is, how do I play this?
Yeah.
And if somehow it's thematic and it's explained well or taught well, it makes all the difference in the world. Because I as a kid, just wanting to play so many board games and just like hitting the rule book and hitting a wall. And that's it. They're done. So strange but true. All right, well, that's what's happening with everyone out there. Anthony, let's talk about the games we want to hit the table this week. Let's talk about our acquisition disorders.
Alrighty, so mine will be pretty quick because there's not a lot of information about there yet. But this is a game called World Order. And at first glance, it doesn't look like much. It's a modern political system in an area control game. Meh. But it's by designers of Hegemony. So it's the new game from Hegemonic Project Games, which is designers Vangelis Bagiatarkis and Varnavas Timotheou. And Bagiatarkis worked on a lot of games over the last few years. We got Among the Stars and Fields of Green, Dice City, and of course, Hegemony, which is one of the hottest games of the last year, if you can find a copy. So this one is it takes place in the year 2010, and it's very specifically situated on the political situation of the 2010s. So like the USA, the rise of China, the vilification of Russia, the trials and tribulations of the economic systems in Europe, all of this kind of post, economic crisis globally speaking. And I don't know a lot more about it at this point, but I know that Hegemony was a very well researched and very well developed game.
Yes.
It's fun to play, but also educational, interesting, and highly asymmetrical.
Mm-hmm.
And so you take that and you put it into this, which is more specific because we're talking about actual world governments, but then also based in a certain era of time. And like they present it like they're entirely different games, but they have a similar vision, right? Helping people get a deeper understanding of the world. And they believe that the best way to do that is through games, which I agree. Right? My class that I teach is called What Board Games Tell Us About the World. So I love games that do this. I wish I could teach this game in my class, or any games like this in my class, but they're way too long. But the fact that they exist is amazing, and that we get to have conversations about them is fantastic. So don't know a whole lot more about it. They just posted their here's what this game is post on BoardGameGeek 3 days ago. But I am excited to learn more and see kind of how it develops and what they're going to do with it. They say it's lighter than Hegemony, and it doesn't have as much asymmetry as Hegemony. So maybe they are making a game that's easier to learn, a little more accessible, which would be fantastic because it makes it easier to teach with and to bring into schools and to share with people and kind of explore these systems.
Sure.
But I don't know that I could say much more about it at this point because they haven't released much more about it at this point. So World Order, which is listed as a 2024 game. So hopefully it hits Kickstarter or whatever they're doing with it soon. And then we hopefully in a year from now, we're talking about it.
Excellent. Well, I want to talk about a game that you and I love, Anthony, and I have memories of this because, in particular, discovered this game at PAX Unplugged and loved the play so much that I kept leaving other games to teach people how to play this game. And I remember that because you kept yelling at me to get back and play the game.
Chris, we're taking too long.
It's true. 100% right. Obsession. Now, we've talked about Obsession before. It's about renovating an estate, managing servants, and pursuing romance in Victorian England. Well, they had a first edition. Awesome. They had a second edition with some changes and upgrades and some corrections and streamlines, along with an expansion. And now they have a new expansion, Obsession. It's a characters expansion with metal coins.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you asked for it. I didn't necessarily ask for it, but it's on Kickstarter. And what I really like about, I guess, KG Games, I should probably just say Dan Halligan because he's a one-man machine. This is not another company. This is his game, his company, his work. He does all the video stuff. I mean, it feels like other people, like other companies are hands in the dirt. This guy's hands in the dirt. He is grinding to teach you everything, help you with everything. He's on the ball. I mean, I appreciate that. So when he does his Kickstarters, what's great about them is he really tries to make them for the fans of the game. He's not trying to make some big profit. He's not trying to hit you with stuff that you don't need necessarily. He's trying to make something that works for you and at a price that sincerely does work. With the production, that's typically more than what you're paying for. So let's talk about the obvious thing. There's coins.
Yep.
He's all about making these coins as inexpensive as possible and as heavy and thick, kind of like poker tokens. If that's a thing that you want to do to enhance your game of Obsession, awesome. You now have that. Money does play a big part in the game, so you will be using the money throughout. Most people are going to be interested in the characters expansion. So, a bunch of different characters come into play here, and a sideboard, which you can utilize the different characters in order to do different things. Primarily 3 different characters and a secondary section where you could do some additional actions. And what it's meant to do is kind of up the stakes of the game. So in the game of Obsession, you are trying to get prestige and you're trying to get these royal people to come to your events. And some of the people are not so nice, so they make things harder. Well, this expansion adds a lot more stuff to make it more dynamic, a lot more rowdy people coming to your events, a lot more opportunity to get some really amazing people to your events, and some new people that will help you manage these different situations. Again, a lot of fun, more characters, more people to visit. Awesome. So, if you have some snooty Americans that are at your fancy British Victorian party, you can call the constable to take care of those people and get them out of your deck building part.
Nice.
I know, right? Again, it's a lot more fun for that kind of particular area. You can consult with the Reverend because sometimes you get objective cards that you cannot use and it's not working for you. You could swap those different objectives out. Again, he's listening to the people who play the game. He wants to make the game better. Some revisions here, some additions here to make the game better, some cards, it just makes the game better. If you love Obsession, this is an automatic buy. And I'll say one of the reasons why too. You may or may not want the coins. I get that. But he's making the games 33% cheaper than what he'll put them on for MSRP. So typically, if you're lucky, a game goes out to the retail market and it's typically 30% off. So he's at least matching that. I can't tell you how many times you look on a Kickstarter, they're like, it's $5 cheaper. You're like, great, I can get it for like $20 cheaper in like a year. But this one, he's sincerely trying to make it as inexpensive as possible so people who do love his game can actually play the game. There's additional modules that you can play. There's additional tiles. There's additional cards. There's more. If you have not played Obsession before, you should. Even if you're not into the theme, I was not into the theme. I love the game. If you're into the theme, this game plays really well. It's a lot of fun. The Kickstarter page has a lot of information, a lot of things you could back. Check it out. It's the new expansion for Obsession. It's new characters.
I love it. I love more content for Obsession. This is not a game I've actually gotten a chance to play very much lately. I should get it to the table more because I do love it.
It's awesome. All right, everybody. So that's what we want to hit our table this week. Let's talk about the games that did hit the table. And we'll let people know if those games are a buy and they should run out and pick those games up because they're obsessed with them. See? Pun intended here. Or if they wanted to sit down and play the games because it's a fun time regardless. Maybe it's more for them. If the games are a dodge and you should just kind of avoid it. Or if the games are the dreaded burn because, let's be honest, it's not great. Hopefully it gets a Nepo baby game in the future and it becomes better. So, Anthony, I got to play 2 games this week. One brand new. You mentioned this when we talked about our Essen release. That Board Game Arena had Forest Shuffle. And I was really excited because I love myself a tableau builder. And, a good nature theme is a lot of fun. So I played the heck out of this. And I got a review for you, my friend, because first off, great artwork. It's got trees. Do you like trees? Because this has trees. It's got trees.
I love trees. Is it mean, though? Because all the games with trees are mean, and I don't like the mean tree games.
It's true. I don't know why those earlier games are so mean when we now have realized that, they're not mean. They share resources, and they're cool.
They're trees.
Yeah. So this game is all about life in a forest, animals, trees, fungi are happening out there, flora and fauna, just having a good time out there. And it's a card game. No real board here. There's a market board, so to speak, where you put the cards out that you'll be able to choose. And then if you hit 10 cards, it kind of clears out, which is awesome. But basically, on your turn, you are going to do pretty much one thing. You're either going to take 2 cards, you can choose from the market or from the draw pile, or you're going to put a card out. And by putting a card out, you're going to pay for the cost of that particular card. You have to start with the trees because the trees are the homes for all the animals. Shocker, right? And there's also winter cards because winter's coming. There's 3 winter cards in this massive deck, and they're sectioned out so you'll have enough time to see all the cards, more or less, to hit that last winter card. Once you pay for the trees and you put them out, you'll be able to put insects, animals, and other plants on the left, right, top, and bottom. Now, every card does a thing. So they all have special abilities. They all score you victory points. Acorns are victory points in this game. So, and they all have different iconography because things kind of bounce off or benefit from certain icons. So, you get your cards, you get ready to play, you start throwing some trees out there. Trees have their own set collection or whatever kind of mechanic, so to speak. And then you start putting these different animals and plants and insects onto the tree, and how you place them, if it's on the same tree or in that particular forest, it's going to score you additional victory points. It's going to draw you additional cards. There's no fighting amongst the forests other than you are chasing after certain cards that other people might want for their own particular set collection. So,
what kind of forest game is that?
I know, it's a very nice, friendly forest game. And it's somewhat thematic. So certain animals benefit off others. So predators will benefit off prey and only certain kind of prey. And as you're putting the cards out, you're building up your forest, you're scoring points, almost an endless number of scoring points. There's bats, there's little squirrels, there's everything. And again, the artwork is very good. So, the game goes on. You keep putting creatures, sliding those cards in, paying their cost so they go out to the market so other people can pick them up. And I gotta say, it's a fine game. I like it. I like the tableau building. I love the art design. I love the idea that animals are going to go on the sides because they're going to live on the branches. Birds and butterflies go on the top. Fungi and other creatures will go on the bottom. Makes a lot of sense. Here's the thing. It overstays its welcome.
Ah, boo.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't understand why. There's 180 cards in this deck. And the game's really kind of a race because you need to build up certain set collections of creatures and animals and plants and things together in order to score points. I love that idea that certain things thematically need to follow other things. But at no time, other than waiting for a particular card to come out, are you really doing much of anything but scoring 2 points, 5 points, 3 points, 2 points. So almost every turn, other than drawing the cards, every time you put cards out, you're scoring points. It goes on way too long. I was like, I'm having fun. And then at some point, I'm like, can this be done? Can this be done? Can this be done? I'm waiting for the winter cards. And you score 120, 150 points in the game. And typically a card will score you more or less 3 to 5 points. Sometimes 10, 15 if you get a good combination together. But it just took so long. And I go in and play it, and I'm like, I'm enjoying this, and I don't want to play anymore. And I'm like, oh, it's still up there. I'll go play it. I'm not enjoying it. I'm like, and I love everything about it. The thematic appeal, every part of it. And I just, honestly, I get tired because, again, your opponents are just scoring points just like you are. Yeah. So it's like, I scored 10 points. They score 5. I scored 15. They scored another 5. I score 5. They scored 5. They didn't take cards this round. I scored another 7. The scoring of points, we talk about point salad games. but there's nothing I can really do other than hate draft to stop them. And at the same time, I'm just constantly scoring points to the point where it's not fun to score points anymore. I'm not building towards anything. Almost every 2 or 3 turns, I'm just scoring points.
A game like that, especially with cards, it needs to be quick. Like a point salad, point city type of quick where it takes 20 minutes. Like, if everybody's going to get points for everything they do, it needs to be a race, a quick race.
Yeah.
It can't be like a long, drawn-out thing.
Well, according to the game itself, playing time is 60 minutes, Anthony. That's what I'm saying.
Way too long. Way too long.
And if you add the AP that does come along with this game reasonably, because you're like, should I hold? Because some of the cards, especially the animal cards in particular, and also the bird / butterfly cards, and also like the animals below, like the top down and the left right cards are split down the middle, so they have choices. Like if I tuck one card in from the left, I lose the ability or the animal to the right. So, and a lot of it's like, I have this deer. If I can get the wolf out there, I'll score a lot of points. But how long do I hold it in my hand? I don't know. It's a good game. I give it a play. I certainly sincerely hope that it works better for all of you, because I love everything about the game other than the game length. And just like after a while, I'm just like, I get tired. I don't know.
Yeah,
that's
really unfortunate.
It kind of breaks my heart a little bit, because this was, like I said, this is one of my most anticipated games from Essen, and I was so excited when I saw it on Board Game Arena, and I was just like, it's a game, and I was just like, do I want this? Like, I guess maybe, I don't know. I'll play it, but I don't know. An hour?
Yeah.
It shouldn't be an hour game. It should be at tops, like you said, 20 minutes, 25 minutes. That's about it.
Yeah. That's what it looked like. I didn't realize it was that long. Like, if I'm going to play a game like that, I'm going to play Living Forest or something. Like,
exactly.
That's the right length. That's the right complexity.
All right. So, Crown of Emara. This is a really interesting game, and I've had this on the shelf forever. And I was so thrilled to actually get to the table, because this looks like the throwback to like the Euros of old, right? You're getting resources, you're trading resources into other fancier things in order to score points, right? You've heard the stories before, but this had a really nice production to it. And what I liked about the game, as far as the experience is concerned, is it had a very tight, regimented system. It wasn't, again, I just talked about how you have these point salad games where you're just scoring points and eventually you just get sick of scoring points. This was quite the opposite. Basically, there are 2 halves of this game. And at the start of the game, you're given 9 cards. You shuffle the cards, you take 3. The cards themselves have an action on them that you'll be able to take, or it has a resource on it that you will be able to get. You decide, you program basically on your turn where you're going to slot the card. Where you slot the card is where the movement of your main worker is going to move on one of 2 separate boards. One board is the countryside. It has a lot of resources and it's all kinds of fun. The other board is basically the town, right? It has the church, it has the castle, it has all the works that are happening, like the workmanship, and it has the market. So you get to do that on your turn. On your turn, you play a card. It, depending on the 1, 2, or 3 slot, that's how many you're going to move around in a circle. Clockwise. Pretty straightforward. And you need to do this because, the king is trying to see who's going to be his successor. So you have to be the most competent Euro player out there, gaining favor, gaining victory points to be the future king of Emara. Or queen. Also very good. So, seems pretty simple. Eventually you play your 3 cards. Next time you get your cards, you get another 3 cards. You play your 3 cards. You get another set of cards, you play your cards. And again, there are resources and then special actions like get to utilize a certain spot or get an exchange rate and such. Beyond that, there's also an opportunity to do a special action. You can place one of your workers in one of the particular fields in order to benefit you when you land on that spot later. It'll give you an additional resource or be able to activate that particular section of the board. So it's a Euro game, right? So what do you do in Euro games? You bake bread. So maybe you need to take your wheat and bake bread or such. Now, that happens, and then the city actions let you do a lot of kind of fun stuff. That's really where the production of all those basic resources kind of take place. There are cards, there are special craftsmen and such, special people out there, and they require resources in order to come to your side, supposedly. And they offer you a lot of opportunities to gain people or move your house track up, because the king is very benevolent and the king wants to see that his people have houses. So it has one of these really interesting mechanics. I've seen it in one or two games where you have two of your own victory point tracks and you take the lesser of the two tracks. So you're racing both tracks, you're racing houses and people. And ideally, they match up, or again, one's ideally going to go far enough that the low one is not too low. Gotcha. Game comes to the halfway point because you've played 9 cards. Hopefully, you've gained a lot of resources. Hopefully, you've visited a lot of places in like the city town square. The city town square is a lot of fun because the church will allow you to trade resources in order to gain scholarship, books, and also be able to gain special abilities when you go to certain spots on the board. The castle allows you to get signet rings, which are important because signet rings and then later more and more gold allows you to raise up your rank. So you go to a duke and you become a prince and all that other kind of fun stuff. So that's pretty cool. It gets you a card and you slot the card on your board, and on the top of your little mini kind of playboard, you have your either male presenting or female presenting character, and you get to slot on top of that, on top of them, or actually under them, but on top of them will be the crown for whatever particular level of class that they happen to be. The market's going to be able to allow you to trade in books, so you can gain a lot of people victory points, or allows you to trade, resources for more money, and money is a variable, it's a wild kind of resources in the game. And then obviously going to the castle allows you, as I mentioned, resources become things because signet rings are a thing. But it also, every particular board on that city area allows a lot of different types of certain number of books get you a certain number of houses, or a certain number of bread gets you a certain number of people. So there's a lot of variety of actions in each of the different town, city, castle kind of centers. You get to the halfway point and you do it again. Now, game comes to an end and it's victory points. There's some minor scoring points for like resources turn into a thing. But that's pretty much it as far as the gameplay is concerned. Slotting those cards in to take those actions, and then move your people to get resources, and then take those resources, move your people in order to gain more victory points, whether it's people or houses. That's primarily the game. It has a certain restriction and tension because you only have those 9 cards, and you only get to play 3 a turn, and you don't get to pick them, the 3 that you get. You do get to pick which ones you play in what order. It's kind of random. You know that you will play all 9 cards in that first half and 9 cards in the second half, so you know that you will get all those additional actions. But it's so restrictive that sometimes the actions, you can't plan a strategy. Like, I will need to get these things because eventually I want to get those things, but I don't know when that's going to happen, and it might happen right away, it might happen later. So ideally, a strategy would be to spend your first half in the market and your second half in the town, but obviously the town becomes more and more expensive. It has this little really cool kind of roof tiles, and every time you pay resources for signet rings or resources for books and special abilities, the cost of those things goes up. I love the idea. I love the presentation, but it is very tight and very random based on those cards. And then there's a second half of that. And just like Forest Shuffle, I feel like it overstays its welcome. I got through the first half and I was like, oh, that's a fun light to medium Euro. I'm good with that. Oh no, there's a second half. Okay, what do we do in the second half? The same thing. Okay, go back to getting resources, go back to trading things. So, I love the idea of trying to benefit your people, bring more people into your kingdom, and benefit them with houses. The two tracks are really challenging because which victory point thing do I want to ramp up? I need to ramp up both of them. But at the end, the different spots in the town, the castle, cathedral, the construction site, market, it's a little bit more fun because of the trading, but at the same time, you don't get to do that very much because you're spending a lot of time getting basic resources. So I'm going to give Crown of Emara a play. I thought it was fine. I thought it was a fine game. And weirdly enough, again, I think it overstays its welcome. And then it has a weird restriction as far as the cards are concerned. Now, you may like that. You may go, I just want my options narrowed down as random as they may come out. And I will build to something at some point, but maybe not because it may not be available. It's fine. Crown of Emara is a fine play at the table. Again, I just would like to be able to build more strategy throughout. But again, that's not this game. So Crown of Emara gets a play.
I think I gave it the exact same review. I reviewed it back on episode 229.
Ooh,
yes,
you're way ahead of me.
Yeah, well, I somehow got an early copy of it at Essen. I can't remember how, but it happened. And it was almost exactly the same thing of like, yeah, this is good, but why is it so long? Why
Yeah.
Not even so long, just because it's not a very long game. It's just that whole mechanic of you do the thing and then you do it again. Everybody played Amun-Re and they're like, let's do that. And like, you're not Amun-Re. You're not. That's a brilliant game, and you shouldn't do that mechanic. So yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah, again, it was the production's very nice. The boards themselves have a lot of decorative art, or you could flip them over to the simpler kind of like where you place your workers. I like that section better. In fact, I usually don't. We played with the more complicated section. It looked nicer, but there's a lot of iconography of, exchange traits that you could miss because the game just doesn't have that kind of focus. Like, it has things to do and it plays well mechanically, but it's just not as sharp as I would want it to be, I guess.
Right.
And again, the turns are very quick. You got 3 cards, you got 3 slots. You should be able to play the game like snappy. The problem is analysis paralysis comes in where you go, which of my 2 workers do I want to move on which board? Because if I move that one there, I've used my 2 card, so now I only have a 1 and 3 left. So that's going to kind of like purposely position me in certain sections I may not want to be. So maybe I won't play my 2. I'll play my 3. But now I only have 1 and 2. So like, where's that going to land me the next 2 rounds? I'm just like, that should not be the thing that I'm concerned about. Like, that's weird. There should be some mitigation.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, those are at the table this week. Anthony, let's get on to the feature review. Our feature review this week, of course, is the higher ranked sequel of older games. So, Anthony, we looked at the top 100, the BGG, the C-Hall, the beginning and the end, the alpha, the omega. It knows everything. It tells us everything. And, of course, I guess we could have a longer list, but the podcast would be much longer than that.
Yeah.
There were games that came out one point, and they were cool and awesome, but they weren't super cool or super awesome. And then somewhere down the road, someone was like, hey, what if we make these things super cool and super awesome with like upgraded pieces and new artwork and fancy mechanics and a rulebook you can actually read? And people were like, yes, I will / buy that game and now it's super awesome. And games that once were like, collecting dust on a shelf, their new Super Deluxe Evolution version is awesome. And now it's like the top of the heap. And again, I don't think we've ever seen this before. We've seen reprints, but there's just so many games now that have like reinvented themselves and like spawned a new version that has just shut up the charts to like heights that the original game never saw at all.
Yeah. Like I'd say 70% of this list has come out in the last 8 years, 7 years. There are a handful of games that came out a while ago that were like iterations of games that came out even longer ago, but for the most part, these are relatively recent games. And this is a relatively recent trend. If you go outside the top 100, there are dozens more.
Yeah.
Like 2.0 sequels,
Sure.
updates that just do the original game a little bit better,
Yeah.
which makes sense. You're iterating on your existing formula. You have thousands of plays to look at. You have feedback from years. But it's I like it, but it's also like a weird thing where sometimes we get a year of releases where it's all 2.0s. It's like, where are the new games? These are all just re-releases of old things. But I don't know. It hitting a gift horse in the mouth if like your favorite game gets a little bit better.
Yeah, it's odd because then you have to decide as a consumer, do I need to buy this game again?
Yeah.
Because it's slightly better, probably.
Yeah.
And now I own 2 copies of the game. There was no problem with the first one, but now I have to buy the second one because it will not get game time because gamers, right? The hotness is certainly a thing.
Yeah.
And there is something that is like there's a negative, which is weird because back in the day, not too long ago, not many years ago, if you had a Grail game, it meant it was old and out of print, and people were excited. And now it's like, I have this Grail game. It's like, cool. Do you have the new version of it? And you're like, but this is the classic. This is the best. This was the original. And they're like, no. New version. So just like when we talked about Dune Imperium Uprising, which again, Dune Imperium, just like that's now a classic game that no one wants to play. Same thing here. And it doesn't mean that the original versions are bad. They're in fact typically very good. It's just, I don't know, like there's some quantum mechanics going on here.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and like some of these games we're going to talk about are still like the original version is still good and people play.
Yeah.
Some of them have more or less replaced their original version, and that's fine. But not all of them. Some of them are like, no. Some people still prefer the older version of the game. A lot of people still prefer the older version of the game, and it's your choice what to play with. But it's an interesting thing that I almost feel like is unique to board gaming. Like you have remakes in film, you have remakes in video games, but it doesn't really like replace or overhaul the original most of the time. It's
Sure.
pretty rare that happens. I can only think of a handful of instances. Whereas in board games, it happens all the time.
Yes. 100%.
Yeah.
All right, Anthony. Well, we got quite a list here. Why don't you start us off?
All right. First up is the obvious number one. That's the number one on BoardGameGeek. That's Brass Birmingham, which is the re-implementation of Brass, aka Brass Lancashire, that came about in the Kickstarter that launched in 2017 for both Lancashire and Birmingham, which were like, hey, we updated the old school Brass from Martin Wallace, and then we also went in and changed the rules a little bit, Gavin Brown and Matt Tolman, along with Martin Wallace, and we added beer and we tweaked the balance of everything. And the game is fundamentally different in ways that make it arguably or inarguably, because it's now number one on BoardGameGeek.
Yeah, pretty much.
Better.
Yeah, I mean, Brass quasi Lancashire. This is like the Star Wars movies. Like it was called Star Wars, and now it's Star Wars New Hope, right?
Yeah, pretty
like,
much. Yeah, exactly.
it's Brass, but now it's Brass Lancashire. Like we know what it was. We know. But yeah, I mean, Brass is at number 20, and again, I'm sure it's only at number 20 because Brass Birmingham has gotten so much attention, and it's number 1. So
yeah, I don't remember what the old Brass was. I feel like it was
It was
close
bad.
to top 100, but it
Well,
wasn't. It wasn't. I don't think it was top 100. I think it was like close. And Lancashire replaced it
it did.
in Board Game Geek's listings, so that is the original listing.
Yes.
People liked the game, but it was very ugly.
It
That's
was
all I
very
remember.
That's what I remember. That's my memory of that as well, is like it was just a very poor production, and it was obviously, and still is, it's a complicated game. So when you have poor production and complications, and you're constantly shooting yourself in the foot by taking loans and such, yeah, it's going to be a challenge. But iron clay chips, fancy new board, beer, fancy open ports that are variable, yeah. Surpassed and supplanted, period.
Yeah, quite. All right. Next up on the list, we have at number 2 overall versus number 133 for the
Oh,
original Pandemic Legacy Season 1. Now, some of you are going to say that's not a re-implementation, and you know what? Disagree. I think it is. Because Pandemic, and we've talked about this at length, Pandemic by itself, it was a game, but nobody plays Pandemic just Pandemic. You play
yeah.
at least with the one expansion, the In the Lab expansion, and then you probably also play all of the many, many variants of the game. And so Legacy is yet another variant of the game where it takes the core mechanics and it builds on that, and it creates this Legacy system and adds these mechanics to it, many of which have been re-implemented in other like standalone versions of the game. And it for a long time was the number 1 game on Board Game Geek. Now it's number 2. And there are 2 sequels to that
Mm-hmm.
that is still, despite all the legacy games that tried to follow it, is the best legacy game that's ever been made.
Yes.
So, Pandemic Legacy Season 1, like if you're going to play Pandemic, there's so many better ways to play it. This is the best way to play it, in my opinion.
And
But
everyone's
there's
opinion, technically,
yeah,
more
I
or
mean,
less.
yeah,
Yeah.
the aggregate opinion is that it is the best. But there's just so many better ways to play it than just like base bland
Yes.
Pandemic.
Absolutely. Yeah. Again, it's an evolution. It's a revolution. I mean, that Pandemic Legacy came out season 1, and it just, again, I remember Pandemic had a pretty lofty place for quite some time. And it was, again, it's one of those gateway games, classic games of all time. And this is just, it's not just a better game. It's altogether a radical departure of the base game of a Pandemic. It fulfills everything that the base game wanted to be. And
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
yeah.
it does what it does what you imagine you were doing in that original game.
Yes.
All right. Next up, we have Twilight Imperium 4th edition. So, this is not the direct sequel. This is the 4th sequel to the original Twilight Imperium. But each of those games is an iteration and development along the original formula.
Mhm.
And this one takes Twilight Imperium 3, which came out, I believe, 10 years earlier, 12 years earlier, I'm sorry, than back in 2005. And it iterates on it significantly. It adds in some of the expansions that worked. It leaves out some of the stuff that doesn't work. It streamlines a lot of things. The game overall is a better experience on almost every playing levels that you can think of. It's not shorter by any means, but it's just streamlined. It's
Mhm.
easier to learn,
Yes.
which is always a barrier for a game this long. And yeah, it's the definitive way to play Twilight Imperium. Uh, and as a result, Twilight Imperium 3 dropped down to number 109.
Yes.
It was in the top 20, and
Yes.
now 4E is at 5, and it's at 109. So
Yeah.
it's just a direct replacement.
And again, I think with Twilight Imperium, I think is a perfect example about this. When we looked at this list to put it together, there's a certain point for board game designers, whether they just stick to the core and that's it, or in this case, Twilight Imperium, where they were like, we can make the game better by attaching expansions to it. And then at some point, the designer's like, I'm tapping out. We can't add any more to it. It's becoming bloat, right?
Yeah.
There's stuff that's not working. And we've seen this with some other companies too, where they're just like keep adding expansions or modules, and you're like, please stop. Give us an essential edition and let's start over. And like Dune Imperium, Uprising, we'll see, could be again one of those kind of things where they could have just added an expansion to it, but they were like, it needs a full rehaul. And Twilight Imperium 4th edition, again, it saves so many people from like having to amass all those expansions and somehow, house rule out some of the bad stuff. And it's just like, here it is, but better. So, and it's great because it's a very long game to play.
Yeah. Yeah, you want the best possible version of the game that's going to take you 9 hours to play.
Yep.
All right. Next up, we have War of the Ring 2nd Edition versus War of the Ring 1st Edition. This one's a little tricky because War of the Ring 1st Edition was a Fantasy Flight Games release in 2004. 2nd Edition came out in 2011 when the license switched over to Ares Games. And it wasn't like a definitive version kind of update that you saw with the shift in like Twilight Imperium. It was a lot of like aesthetic changes. So like you had a bigger rulebook with additional discussions. You had new sculpts and changes in like how the miniatures and the pieces were presented. The cards were bigger all of a sudden, like some bigger artwork, bigger presentation. And there was a lot of tweaks to the rules. This has become the definitive edition of the game, however, because it's the one you can still get. B, there are several expansions to it that are generally available. C, there are collector's editions and anniversary editions of the game, because Ares Games has held the license now for 12 years. And it's just generally considered one of the best balanced asymmetrical 2-player games ever made. So it found ways to tweak and iterate and build on what came in the 1st edition and keep that and maintain it and build on it. And now it is number 9 on BoardGameGeek's list versus number 168 for the 1st edition.
Absolutely. Well said.
All right. Next up, Gaia Project, which is number 12, versus Terra Mystica, which is number 26. So Terra Mystica this is obviously not a huge gap, right? Terra Mystica is still one of the best games ever made. But with all the data around it, people have found that it's not as balanced as its 2 sequels. Gaia Project, now the highest ranked of those sequels. Gaia Project has kind of the tech track that fixes like the cult track issues. It has an asymmetrical modular board setup, has better balance among the various races that are available. Age of Innovation is out now. It's fantastic. It'll probably move up the list. I don't know if it'll get this high, but Gaia Project fixes a lot of the issues people have with Terra Mystica.
Mhm.
And just, if you like the sci-fi theme, is the better game. If you do not, then Age of Innovation is the better game. So
Yes.
Either way, Terra Mystica has been outpaced.
Yeah, I think Age of Innovation will eventually surpass it. But again, it's interesting because Terra Mystica has such a huge following, the great artwork. Gaia Project mechanically is better, but it's bland as far as the presentation is concerned. So I appreciate the industry, and all the people out there who voted for this game, recognizing how it is better. It is seriously a step up.
Yeah, absolutely. Next up, we have Through the Ages, A New Story of Civilization. It is currently sitting at number 13 overall. The original version of this, Through the Ages, A Story of Civilization, so not a new one, just a story.
It's just a story.
Just a story. It's sitting at number 80.
Mhm.
And so this was a re-release in 2015 by Vlada Shavatel and CGE. And it's a lot of small changes. It's a lot of balance tweaks and adjustments to the cards, and overall like the balance and layout of the game, but also a pretty extensive overhaul to how military attacks work,
Mm.
which definitely has a huge impact on how you play this game. And part of that is like they were working on the digital implementation, and so the balance kind of came through in that, and we got a much better version of the board game as a result. So it is the definitive way to play this game. The original version is kind of just, if you have it, it's still very good, but the new version is better, so why not play that?
Exactly. And the original version was super high on the
Yeah.
top 100 as well. So for this to raise even higher, and again, I think just like with War of the Ring, 2nd edition, Through the Ages, A New Story of Civilization, and I guess also Twilight Imperium 4th edition. These are very long games and very complicated
Yeah.
games. So streamlining is definitely warranted, and we're so glad about it.
Yeah. Yeah. I love this version. Next up, we have another very long game, which thankfully we have again streamlined and made better.
Yay!
So, so Eclipse, Second Dawn for the Galaxy versus Eclipse, New Dawn for the Galaxy. So the new version came out in 2020, and really like 2021, 2022 when you can actually find it. The original version is 2011, so about 10 years in between them. And the new version's rated 19, the old one 76. And it's another case where the old one kind of fell down the charts after the new one came out. Um, this new updated version was on Kickstarter, had a bunch of big fancy stuff, and it came with new graphic design, had new ships, new miniatures for everything, the ancients, the orbitals, all that good stuff, new inlays. So a lot of like aesthetic upgrades, but they also like tweaked and upgraded the gameplay to like streamline it and make it more uh, accessible in terms of like the rules and how you actually engaged with the game, but also like the various expansions, of which there were several for the original version of the game, kind of baked into the new version now. So this is the again definitive upgraded version of the original Eclipse, and I think the people I've talked to who like Eclipse and the ratings here on BoardGameGeek kind of reflect that.
It makes a lot of sense too, and absolutely necessary. And it plays so much better too. It's a lot of fun. It's not the grind that the first edition was. I mean, it was a lot of fun the first edition, but this one's so much more streamlined. It's just really nice to see, especially when you have so many possible upgrades. It's just nice that it just makes sense. It's clear.
Yeah, yeah, it was such a good game always, but then it did take a very long time to play. It was hard to learn, and just like layering in all the extra stuff from expansions took time, and now it's just all baked in, which is great. All right, next up we have the Crew Deep Sea, or Mission Deep Sea, I should say. This was the re-implementation of the Crew: The Quest for Planet 9, the original game that came out, nominated for the Kennerspiel. This one takes that original formula, but adds several new things. So you have like more limitations to communication. You have new ways of approaching the various like shared goals that you're working through. It's still the same basic idea of communal collaborative communication within a trick taking game, but the missions are now a little more complex and engaging and interesting, and the result is a much better game. So people just generally, I say the same thing. If you're like, oh, I've heard the Crew is good, you're like, yeah, get Mission Deep Sea, it's a better game. And it's not like, oh, it's like a standalone expansion. It is, but it's just a better game, so get this one instead.
It's interesting how there's just in board gaming, there's just a very few games out there where it's just like, this is the definitive version. Like, just don't even bother. Don't bother with the other one. Don't bother. Just, yes, it might cost you $5 more, $10 more, $100 more. Buy this other version. This is in fact the case. It's so surprising in this modern age, so to speak, where it's like, nope, better, just better. Just do it, you'll be fine. And this is one of those cases.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and there's like it's weird because some games are like, oh, there's like 3 or 4 versions. Like Azul, there's a bunch of versions, and they're all good. Pick the one you like best. This one's like, no, just get the new one. Like the old one's fine, but this one's better. All right, next up we have PAX Premier Second Edition. This was on Kickstarter, came out in 2019, and it re-implemented PAX Premier, the first edition, which was a small box Sierra Madre game that Cole Worley did with Phil Eklund, and or at least Phil Eklund had some kind of input on. The new version is a larger box. It's more uh, just broad in terms of like what comes with it. The artwork's fantastic. The additional historical elements are great. The game is more streamlined and accessible and easier to learn with the solo mode that the original didn't have. It's better in almost every single way. And whether that's because Cole Worley had like, this is my game, I can do what I want with it, or they had that Kickstarter money or whatever it was, it went from a, yeah, this is fine, game in PAX Premier, which is kind of hard to learn and a bit dense, to this is one of the best games ever made in PAX Premier Second Edition. So, and this one just recently is available on Board Game Arena too, so you can now play it online, which is amazing.
Yeah, and I think as far as our list is concerned, this is the greatest gap.
Yeah. This goes from number 39 for the second edition to 1,925 for the first edition. It was just nothing. It was like a forgettable thing released by Sierra Madre. You know, I've heard people play it or recommend it, but it wasn't like highly out there. And Cole Worley wasn't like a big name that he is
Sure.
now. So it's a big gap.
Yeah, that's a major glow up for a game that is theme wise a little dense, a little
Yeah.
out there. I would never think people would necessarily be interested, or like, again, the lavish production. And I guess Kickstarter helped with this too, right? This was a Kickstarter game, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. So the version we got was very pretty with these big chunky pieces and like the cloth mats
Yeah.
and like the metal coins that you could get. It was amazing versus like the tiny little square box you got from Sierra Madre, where it was all dense and packed.
Yeah.
That
And
helped for sure.
and even the production, while it's very nice, is a very simple handful of pieces. It's not a giant board game with like miniatures and wood pieces and
No.
meeples.
Yeah.
It's like you would think this was the scaled down version, and it works.
It's so well. Yeah, such a brilliant game. All right, a couple more here. We have Mansions of Madness, second edition, which sits at number 55 on the list. The original version currently sits at 496. The big thing that this did was it took all of the complicated, fiddly setup and layout nonsense of the first edition, which, if you set it up correctly, was brilliant, but if you did not, ruined everybody's afternoon. And they replaced it with an app. So if you are okay with app-based games, Mansions of Madness Second Edition was a huge step up from the first edition, which was hard to set up, hard to play and learn, and layering in expansions would be complicated and time-consuming, especially for the person like setting up and running the game. Uh, the second edition allowed everybody to play together cooperatively using the app to kind of guide everyone. Um, I've played it several times. It's a fantastic experience, and yeah, it's electronic. I understand, but it's still so much better than the first edition. I would never play that first one.
Yeah, again, just the setup breakdown, managing all the pieces, and there's a lot of pieces here. And again, this was another game that just, it wasn't just better, it wasn't just revised, it was, heralded, like, again, like as if Mansions of Madness never was out there. Like, this was just like such a new creation to the world that people were just like, have you heard of this game? Like, yeah, that was the first edition. Like, no, this is the second edition. And even with the second edition, somehow it's like otherworldly. And again, I haven't played the first edition, but everyone seems to believe it is otherworldly as far as like its ability to get to the table and play well. And it's hung around. I mean, 55 in the top 100, crazy.
Yeah, that's nuts. All right, and then the last game that we pulled from the top 100 that is much higher ranked and better than its original, objectively speaking, of course, is Android Netrunner, which comes in at number 72, and its original version, which is just Netrunner, is 1,124. So the original version of this was a collectible card game that released in the 1990s, 1996, I believe. And it was made by Richard Garfield. So like post Magic, in that midst of everybody wants Richard Garfield to make a game. Wizard of the Coast was like, hey, let's make a cyberpunk game. And he did. And it was, you had corporations versus runners. And it was this creative, asymmetrical, engaging collectible card game that lasted a few years. But like we talked about this actually a few weeks ago, like many games, it failed.
Yes.
And then Fantasy Flight picked it up and brought it back in 2012, which with Richard Garfield on board and Lucas Litzinger within the company, kind of updating and optimizing it for the LCG format. And they're saying like, great, this is brilliant. It's asymmetrical. We've got the corp side, we have the runner side, and we can create this building, growing, interesting world with these, you know, living card game releases, and it was one of the most popular games in the world for 8-9 years until they lost the license because Wizards of the Coast had licensed them the Netrunner IP. And we all kind of thought once it died that they were going to bring it back, and Wizards of the Coast never brought it back. They just didn't want to give Fantasy Flight any more money, I guess. So um, the game lives on. There are like fan made releases. I've played this game more since it died than when it was alive, just with other people who have like their fan made stuff or picked up old stuff off the secondary market. It's a brilliant game. I really, really enjoy the way that Fantasy Flight kind of optimized and built this up and created a system where you can create your own runner deck or your own corp deck, and like you're dealing with, you know, kind of breaking through the ice. And it's such a cool theme and it works really, really well. And I admittedly have not played the original CCG, but knowing the amount of CCGs I played in the 90s, there's no way it's as good as this.
Yeah, I agree 100%.
All right,
well,
so
good.
There we go. That's all of them. Everything from the top 100, at least. Again, there are a bunch more. So if you write in, you're like, "Oh, what about this one? Or what about this one?" Like, it's probably not a top 100 game, but maybe we'll get to it in the future.
Absolutely. And again, maybe one day these games will be even supplanted by newer games because
Probably, yeah.
they will all get their cyberpunk space chip version of them in the future. So until then, this is Chris.
And this is Anthony.
And until we're supplanted by better Neo babies, we'll save you all a seat at the table. Take care, everybody.
Bye.